You stand in a sweltering jungle clearing under a makeshift pavilion. It is night, and the air hangs heavy with humidity and fear. Around you, hundreds of men, women, and children are packed shoulder to shoulder, their faces slick with sweat and terror. Dim light bulbs cast an eerie glow on the gathering. In the distance, crickets chirp and a baby wails. A commanding voice booms from the wooden stage at the front. A man in dark sunglasses and a sweat-stained shirt paces with a microphone. Rev. Jim Jones, the leader you once trusted with your life. Guards clutching rifles and crossbows stand at the pavilion's edges, silhouettes in the shadows. There is no escape. If we can't live in peace, let's die in peace. Jones thunders, his amplified words crackling through loudspeakers. Some in the crowd murmur assent, others choke back sobs. A trembling mother near you holds her crying toddler close, pressing the child's face into her hip to muffle the sobs. On the stage, Jones insists this is a revolutionary act, not suicide, a final protest against the outside world. Assistants bring out a large metal vat filled with a purple liquid. Even from several paces away, you can smell a bitter, almond-like scent wafting from it, a mix of cyanide poison and fruit punch. Parents begin pulling syringes from a bucket and squirting the poison punch into their children's mouths. The children's cries quickly weaken to silence as the toxin takes hold. One by one, the smallest victims go limp in their parents' arms. A chilling hush falls for a moment, the shock of the irreversibility of what's happening. Then pandemonium. Adults wail in grief and terror, yet many step forward, as ordered, to line up for their cup of poison. Your heart pounds. An armed guard shoves you forward. A paper cup is thrust into your shaking hands. Inside is the lethal potion, grape flavor aid laced with cyanide. All around, people are drinking. Some do it resolutely. Others gag and convulse as the poison burns through them. Bodies begin dropping to the ground. The pavilion erupts with screams of agony, cries for mercy, and the desperate sobbing of the dying. The mother beside you slumps to the dirt, her child still clutched in her arms. Your vision blurs with tears and confusion. How did it come to this? Just minutes ago, you were singing hymns with your community. Now you're surrounded by convulsing bodies and the unmistakable scent of death. This nightmare is real. This is Jonestown, Guyana on November 18, 1978, the final night of the People's Temple. In the next hour, over 900 people will lie dead in and around this pavilion, 1/3 of them children. You clutch the poison cup as Jim Jones urges, die with a degree of dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. Your stomach churns. You raise the cup to your lips, and history is forever changed. How did a hopeful community come to such an apocalyptic end? To answer that, we must step back to the beginning of this dark tale. Before we continue, if you find value in exploring history's darkest corners in an immersive way, please consider subscribing to our channel. We delve into real events like this to shed light on lessons from the past. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts or questions in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Now, let's journey back to trace the rise and fall of Jonestown. Our story begins decades earlier in a very different setting. Jim Jones was once a young charismatic preacher in 1950s Indiana, driven by ideals of equality and community. In an era of racial segregation, Jones preached racial integration and social justice from the pulpit, drawing an unusually diverse congregation to his new church, which he called the People's Temple. Many who met him were impressed by his passionate sermons against racism and poverty. Here, they thought, was a man who truly cared for the downtrodden. By the mid-1960s, Jones had moved his growing flock to California, seeking what he called a promised land safe from potential nuclear war. In Northern California, and later San Francisco, the People's Temple flourished. Jones mixed evangelical fervor with progressive political activism, and it earned him a positive reputation in liberal circles. High-profile figures like civil rights activist Angela Davis and San Francisco Supervisor Harvey Milk praised Jones and his work. The temple ran soup kitchens, cared for the elderly and poor, and stood against racism. Many members were idealistic, educated folks who genuinely wanted to change the world for the better. Under Jones's leadership, they found a sense of purpose and belonging. This was not a fringe cult at first, but a social movement that seemed to practice what it preached. Yet, even in those early days, there were dark undercurrents. Jones's charisma had a manipulative edge. He claimed special powers, even that he was the reincarnation of religious figures like Jesus and Buddha, and staged phony miracles to convince followers of his divinity. As time went on, he demanded absolute loyalty. Former temple members later revealed that Jones used humiliating punishments and blackmail to keep members in line. Punishment became a normal thing, recalls Yolanda Williams, who was a member of the temple in California. Those who displeased Father, as Jones insisted he be called, might be beaten in front of the congregation or forced to confess imaginary sins. Jones also started to isolate his followers from their families, telling them to cut ties with anyone outside the temple. Bit by bit, a once inspiring movement began to morph into something more sinister, centered around one man's unchecked authority. By the early 1970s, rumors and allegations about the People's Temple were spreading. The press started taking a closer look. Former members spoke of financial fraud, mind control, and abuse within the group. In 1977, an explosive magazine article exposed many of these abuses, suggesting that Jim Jones was not the benevolent preacher he claimed to be, but a manipulator who used his followers for money, power, and even sex. Jones grew paranoid. He saw conspiracies everywhere and felt the walls closing in. Facing mounting media scrutiny and potential investigations, he decided it was time to radically escape the oppressive United States and create his utopia elsewhere. Jim Jones's grand escape plan led him to the tiny nation of Guyana in South America. In 1974, he leased land in the remote Guyanese rainforest and quietly began building a settlement. By 1977, as pressure in the U.S. intensified, he urged his entire congregation to pack up and move to this jungle colony, which he modestly named Jonestown after himself. Thrilled by the promise of a fresh start, nearly 1,000 people, whole families, young idealists, older folks seeking community, followed Jones into the wilderness to build what he promised would be the perfect socialist utopia. At first, Jonestown might have looked like a pioneer adventure. Members cleared dense jungle to plant crops, built cabins and communal buildings, and sang songs of hope at night. They were creating a new world by hand, and the spirit of camaraderie was real. But the hopeful veneer did not last long. The reality of life in Jonestown was grueling. The settlement was overcrowded and undersupplied. Followers toiled from sunrise to sunset in the tropical heat, trying to eke out enough food from the poor soil. They ate rice, beans, and whatever they could grow, but there was never quite enough. Malaria and tropical diseases took a toll, and medications were scarce. Jones, meanwhile, controlled all communication with the outside world, ensuring no one could easily call for help or leave. Upon arrival, members had been forced to surrender their passports, money, and any contact with outsiders. They were effectively trapped in Jonestown's isolation. Inside this green prison, Jones's behavior deteriorated further. Always narcissistic, he now became outright delusional. He was in declining mental and physical health, popping drugs to stay awake and quell his anxieties, and he saw enemies behind every tree. He installed a loudspeaker system throughout Jonestown that blared his voice day and night, delivering interminable harangues about impending threats. Exhausted followers were forced to attend long, late-night meetings where Jones would rant for hours, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, accusing traitors and brainwashing his people into believing the outside world wanted to destroy them. Sleep deprivation and constant propaganda became weapons he wielded to break down resistance. Dissent or disobedience in Jonestown brought swift punishment. Jones created a climate of terror to maintain control. Minor infractions like questioning orders or failing to meet work quotas could land one in the learning crew, a punishment detail for hard labor like ditch digging or cleaning latrines. More serious or repeated crimes led to public humiliation and violence. During the nightly meetings, Jones would single out individuals and encourage others to beat them for their misdeeds. One recovered tape from Jonestown records a community meeting where a teenage boy was beaten severely in front of the crowd as Jones watched. Some punishments were pure nightmares. Jones had constructed an underground box only 6 feet by 4 feet that he used as a crude solitary confinement cell. Followers who defied him might be stuffed into this lightless, coffin-like pit for hours or days, left to panic in claustrophobic darkness. He also preyed on people's deepest fears. One woman who was terrified of snakes was forced into a pit with a large snake slithering over her as she screamed, to cure her of her fear and teach obedience. On another occasion, dissidents were reportedly tied to a stake in the jungle overnight as insects and who knows what crawled over them, while Jones taunted that wild animals might tear them apart. Even children weren't exempt. Troublesome kids could be dangled headfirst down a well as a scare tactic. Life in Jonestown had become a brutal authoritarian regime. Jones was its supreme ruler, and no detail of daily life escaped his control. Despite the hardships, many members remained loyal, caught in Jones's psychological web. He had systematically cut them off from any alternative. Family members outside began to worry, hearing only tightly controlled letters often censored by Jones's staff from their loved ones. Some defectors who managed to leave Guyana spread the alarm. In June 1978, a brave temple escapee named Deborah Layton submitted an affidavit to U.S. authorities, warning that Jonestown was a prison camp in the jungle and that Jim Jones had lost his mind. She pleaded that something be done before it was too late. Over 1,000 Americans, she said, were in danger. Back in Jonestown, Jones was aware of these betrayals and only became more volatile. He started conducting loyalty tests he called White Nights. In the dead of night, sirens would blare and Jones's urgent voice would summon everyone from their beds. Sleepy, scared people would stumble to the pavilion, where Jones announced their community was under siege by enemies. On several of these occasions, he handed out cups of liquid, telling everyone it was poison, and that they must be ready to die for their cause. They would drink only to find out it was a drill, a test of who was truly faithful. Jones was rehearsing for mass suicide all along. These white night drills kept the populace in a state of fear and obedience, ready to do the unthinkable at a moment's notice. By October 1978, Jonestown was a pressure cooker of exhaustion, fear, and simmering despair. Some followers secretly plotted escape. Others convinced themselves Jones truly was the only salvation. Jones ranted about looming threats, the CIA, the FBI, conspirators and traitors everywhere. Armed guards patrolled the compound, ensuring no one could simply walk out to freedom. The community was on a hair trigger, and that trigger was about to be pulled. Desperate to save their loved ones, a group of ex-temple members and worried relatives in the U.S. banded together as the concerned relatives and pressured the government to act. Congressman Leo Ryan, a U.S. representative from California, took particular interest. Ryan was known as an idealist unafraid of hands-on investigation. In November 1978, he decided to personally travel to Jonestown to find out what was happening and whether people were being held there against their will. Leo Ryan flew to Guyana with a small delegation, a team of journalists including an NBC News crew, a few concerned relatives, and some aides. On November 17, 1978, they arrived unannounced at Jonestown's gates. This put Jim Jones in a quandary. He had always told his followers that outsiders would come to destroy them, and now outsiders had indeed arrived. But they were U.S. officials and media that he couldn't just turn away. Reluctantly, Jones allowed the visitors in, greeting them with a forced smile and reassurances that all was well. To show his goodwill, he even hosted a big dinner and entertainment that night. The pavilion where doom would unfold the next day was, on the evening of November 17th, filled with music and laughter. Temple members performed songs and dances for the guests, and a feast was laid out. Under Jones's watchful eye, followers told the visitors how happy they were living in Jonestown, a rehearsed showcase of utopia. Congressman Ryan, at first, was impressed by the apparent joy and communal spirit. On camera, people declared that Jonestown was the best thing that ever happened to them. But beneath the smiling facade, not everyone was content. As the night wore on, a temple member slipped a note to NBC correspondent Don Harris, or another member of Ryan's group. Accounts vary. The crumpled piece of paper was furtively passed hand to hand. On it, several Jonestown residents had scrawled a desperate plea: "Please help us get out of Jonestown." The secret was out. Some people were indeed being held against their will. When this note came to light, the festive mood shattered. On the morning of November 18, 1978, Congressman Ryan confronted Jones, telling him that some members wanted to leave with the delegation. This hit Jones hard. He grew agitated, insisting that anyone was free to go if they truly wanted, his lie exposed by the fact that armed guards hovered around. Sensing the rising tension, Ryan quickly moved to gather those who wished to escape. Only a small number dared to step forward, around 15 to 20 people, out of the nearly 1,000. found the courage to publicly say, "I want to go." They were mostly white members. Many others, especially African American members who had been with Jones longest, hesitated or stayed, unsure if this was truly freedom or another test. One dramatic scene unfolded as families literally split apart. A man named Al Simon decided to leave with the congressman and tried to take his young children, but his wife, a loyal Jones follower, screamed and fought, refusing to let the children go. Chaos and grief broke out in broad daylight. Ryan tried to stay calm, assuring everyone that anyone who wanted to go home to the US was welcome to come. In total, about 20 temple members, including a few small children, chose to defect that day. Jones stood by, fuming, clenching his fists as defection's proof of his betrayal narrative happened in front of his eyes. One of Jones's loyalists suddenly lunged at Congressman Ryan with a knife, screaming that he was going to kill him. In that moment, pandemonium nearly erupted. Ryan was unhurt, the knife was wrestled away and the attacker subdued, but the message was clear: Jones's peaceful veneer had cracked. Ryan announced it was time to leave. Now, it was early afternoon on November 18th. The group of defectors, the congressman, reporters, and concerned relatives all crammed onto a small dump truck, the only transport available, to head to the nearby airstrip at Port Kaituma, about 6 miles away, where two small planes were waiting to evacuate them. As the truck pulled away, Jones's voice, angry, amplified, could be heard warning the remaining crowd that they'd been betrayed. Fear and confusion rippled through those left behind. The defectors on the truck looked back at the place that had been their home, some crying with relief, others with sadness, not realizing the nightmare was only escalating. At Port Kaituma airstrip, a muddy clearing carved out of the jungle, the group split to board two small planes, a larger Twin Otter plane and a smaller Cessna. It was mid-afternoon. Rain clouds loomed and everyone was anxious to take off. Suddenly, as people were loading their luggage and the defectors were nervously boarding, a tractor pulling a trailer rumbled onto the far end of the airstrip. A few men from Jonestown were on that trailer, members of Jones's feared security squad. Before anyone could react, the men raised rifles and shotguns and opened fire on the delegation. Bullets sprayed the tarmac. Panicked screams filled the air as people ran or dove for cover beneath the planes. The gunmen showed no mercy. Congressman Leo Ryan was shot multiple times and fell to the ground, dying on the spot. He became the only U.S. congressman ever assassinated in the line of duty. One defector, a woman who had just decided to leave, was gunned down. NBC reporter Don Harris, cameraman Bob Brown, and a newspaper photographer Greg Robinson were all shot and killed. A United States congressman's investigative mission had ended in bloodbath. Some of the delegation miraculously survived by feigning death or hiding in the grass, including a young congressional aide named Jackie Spire, who, despite being shot 5 times, lived to crawl away and get help. But in total, 5 people lay dead on that jungle airstrip, and several others were wounded. The shooters, having done their terrible task, melted back into the jungle, likely returning to Jonestown to report mission accomplished to Jim Jones. When the shooters returned to Jonestown and told Jim Jones that Congressman Ryan was dead and the defectors dealt with, Jones knew the end had come. In his mind, there was now no going back. He told the gathering in the pavilion that U.S. authorities would surely invade Jonestown now, parachuting in to punish them all for the congressman's death. Whether he truly believed this or simply used it as the ultimate pretext, Jones decided to initiate the final act that he had rehearsed so many times: revolutionary suicide. At around 5 p.m. on November 18, 1978, Jones called all members to the central pavilion. Survivors recall that a calm settled over Jones. The betrayal he felt turned into a grim resolve. As people filtered in, many likely already knew what was about to happen. They had practiced this in the White Knight drills. But practice cannot prepare one for reality. This time, the vat of poison was real. Jones took his seat on a throne-like chair on the stage, an ironic perch from which he often lorded over meetings. Some accounts say he was holding a megaphone or microphone, addressing the crowd almost conversationally at first. An audio tape known as the death tape captured these final moments. On it, Jones's tone is alternately calm, cajoling, angry, and desolate. He explains to the community that the congressman is dead, and there is no hope now of reprieve. "We've been so terribly betrayed," he laments in a voice thick with anguish. He tells them that enemies will soon swarm the jungle to slaughter them all, including their innocent babies. And the only escape is to lay down our lives in what he calls an act of revolutionary defiance. Some in the crowd object. The tape records at least a couple of dissenting voices. One woman stands up and pleads for an alternative, suggesting, if we have to die, let's let the children live. Or let's fight rather than just kill ourselves. Others shout her down. Another man volunteers to go fight the attackers himself if it would help. But Jones dismisses this. It's too late for that. A loyalist cries out that they should trust Dada Jones because he's never led them astray. The majority remain eerily quiet or compliant as this debate unfolds, likely in shock. Jones, growing impatient, asserts in a booming voice, if we can't live in peace, let's die in peace. This chilling motto hushes the murmurs. The decision is made. Plastic cups, Kool-Aid or Flavor Aid mix, and a stash of deadly potassium cyanide which the temple had been stockpiling for months are brought out. Nurses and aides, following Jones's orders, move with practiced efficiency. They mix a large batch of grape-flavored punch with powdered cyanide and sedatives. The poison is strong enough to kill an adult in minutes. Jones insists that the children and infants be killed first. Be kind to the children, he says over the loudspeaker, the seniors too. In his twisted logic, he believes it merciful to take the young and old first so they don't suffer fear watching others die. Parents and medical staff draw up syringes of the poison liquid. Mothers and fathers throughout the pavilion begin sobbing as they administer death to their own kids. A 10-year-old boy cries that he doesn't want to die. His mother still gently squeezes the syringe into his mouth, whispering through tears. Babies scream as the bitter poison burns their throats, then fall silent, bodies going limp. Over 300 children are killed in this way, right in front of their parents. Some parents, overcome with grief, follow immediately by gulping poison for themselves. Others require more coercion. For the adults, large metal tubs or bowls filled with poison punch are set on tables. Jones's loyal enforcers, some carrying guns, form a perimeter around the pavilion. There is no running away now. Armed guards stand ready to shoot anyone who tries to flee. One by one, Jonestown residents step up. Some go stoically, even reverently, telling Jones they are ready to show their loyalty. They drink, then walk off to the sides and lie down on the ground, or are guided there as convulsions begin. Others are terrified, shaking their heads or weeping. Those who refuse to drink are forced either made to ingest it at gunpoint or injected with poison by syringe into their arms. The tape recordings and eyewitness accounts make it clear, this was not a peaceful, willing mass suicide. It was a mass murder under duress, mixed with fanatic devotion. The pavilion devolves into absolute horror. Many people, after drinking, realize in their final seconds what is happening and cry out in pain and regret. Bodies litter the ground, some twitching, some already still. The potent mix brings death in about 5 minutes or less, but those minutes are excruciating. Cyanide causes horrific convulsions, foaming at the mouth, and agonizing suffocation as cells are starved of oxygen. Through all of this, Jim Jones sits on his chair and speaks into his microphone, alternately calming and scolding. When some in the crowd cry hysterically, he urges, "Stop these hysterics. This is not the way to die." Full of emotion, guards move about trying to quiet people. The tape even captures Jones shouting, "Mother, mother, mother," apparently towards his own wife, Marcellini, who may have been begging him to stop. Marcellini was a nurse and had long disagreed with Jones's more extreme ideas. It's believed she did not want this mass death. But any voices of reason were silenced by the crowd's fervor and Jones's fury. Marcellini herself was either forced or chose to drink the poison in the end. She perished along with their followers. As the poison worked its way through the community, the screams and cries gradually fell quiet. The jungle night that had erupted in chaos returned to a dark stillness, broken only by the drone of insects and the occasional moan of a dying person. In less than 30 minutes, over 900 People's Temple members lay dead or dying on the ground. Entire families were gone. Of the few who survived that carnage, a handful managed to slip away into the jungle as the suicides began miraculously unnoticed in the commotion. A teenage boy woke from the chaos of the poisonings and fled into the bush. An elderly woman slept through the entire ordeal hidden in her cabin, only to wake up the next day to a ghost town of corpses. And roughly 80 members of People's Temple were not in Jonestown that night at all. The temple basketball team and some others were in Guyana's capital for errands or assignments, which spared their lives. But virtually everyone who drank the poison perished, including Jim Jones himself. The cult leader was found slumped in his chair on the stage, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. It's likely he took his own life with a pistol once he knew his flock was finished, a quicker death than the one he forced on his followers. In the end, 909 inhabitants of Jonestown died in the commune that night. The Jonestown Massacre, as it would soon be known, was the largest deliberate loss of American civilian life in a non-natural event until September 11, 2001. The next morning, November 19, 1978, Guyanese authorities and American personnel arrived at Jonestown. What they saw left even seasoned soldiers and diplomats shaken to the core. The Jonestown compound was carpeted with bodies. Men, women, and children lay face down in the mud, hundreds of them, ranged in clusters where families had died together. Many of the deceased held each other in their final moments, the last semblance of comfort as they passed from life. Some mothers and fathers died with their arms around their little ones. The tropical heat was already causing the corpses to bloat and decay, adding to the horror. U.S. military teams were brought in for the grim task of collecting and identifying the bodies. It took days. Photographs of piles of bodies in colorful clothes sprawled around the Jonestown pavilion made headlines worldwide, a jarring testament to the depth of human tragedy that had occurred. News of the Jonestown massacre stunned the world. To most people, the idea that nearly 1,000 Americans or members of a church would commit suicide on the orders of a madman was incomprehensible. Early reports struggled with the narrative. Was it mass suicide or mass murder? In truth, it was a grotesque combination of both, but murder was heavily at play. Many victims had been coerced or physically forced to die. The sheer number of dead, and the fact that over 300 were children, led to an outpouring of grief and shock. This was a devastating cultural trauma. The late 1970s were already a cynical time in America post-Vietnam and Watergate. Jonestown's horrific end seemed to sound the death knell for any lingering idealism from the 1960s. In a way, Jonestown symbolized the dark side of the era's utopian dreams, a vision of equality and love that decayed into paranoia, tyranny, and death. In the United States, the legacy of Jonestown endures in uncomfortable ways. One is linguistic. The phrase "drink the Kool-Aid" has entered the common lexicon, meaning blind and foolish devotion to a cause or leader. People often quip "don't drink the Kool-Aid" as a warning against dangerous groupthink, a direct reference to the poison punch that killed the Jonestown members. It's a bitter footnote that the drink was actually a cheaper brand called Flavor Aid, but Kool-Aid became the catchphrase. Yet, behind that casual phrase lies the very real horror of what happened, a fact sometimes lost when the saying is used flippantly. For the survivors and the families of those who died, Jonestown is not a metaphor, it is a searing personal tragedy. People like Tim Carter, who lost his wife and baby son that day, would forever be haunted by what they witnessed. Carter, one of the few who escaped alive, he was sent out of the pavilion on an errand by chance and survived. Later said the sound of that day was people screaming, people crying, definitely not a scene of peaceful willing death, but one of terror. He murdered my wife and my son, my family. That's how I feel about Jim Jones, Carter said, flatly condemning the cult leader who had once been his trusted pastor. This sentiment is shared by many. Whatever ideals Jim Jones might have once preached, in the end he was a murderer on a massive scale. In total, including the victims at the airstrip and in a temple house in Georgetown, 918 people died because of Jim Jones's orders. It remains one of the most chilling incidents of cult violence in history. Jonestown forced governments and the public to reckon with the phenomenon of cults and how charismatic leaders can drive ordinary people to do the unthinkable. After 1978, there was increased attention to cult deprogramming and warning signs of religious extremism. But the story of Jonestown also serves as a cautionary tale with even broader implications. What can we learn from this? Jonestown's tragedy underscores the dangers of absolute power and unquestioning loyalty. Jim Jones demanded total control over his followers' lives, and they surrendered their critical thinking to him bit by bit, with ultimately fatal consequences. It's a stark reminder that charisma and good intentions can be twisted into a lethal cult of personality. Many in People's Temple started off as idealists seeking equality, community, and social justice noble goals. But under the influence of a manipulative leader, they gradually abandoned their own judgment and moral autonomy. By the time red flags appeared like fake healings, beatings, and talk of suicide revolution, it was often too late. They were either too psychologically dependent or physically trapped to leave. This is not just a story about one maniacal preacher in the 1970s. It's a timeless lesson about vigilance in the face of groupthink and authoritarianism. Whether in religious movements, political movements, or even in everyday workplaces and social circles, the warning signs are similar: a leader who permits no criticism, a group that isolates itself and demonizes outsiders, the gradual escalation of demands on members, and the justification of immoral acts for some higher cause. Jonestown shows how these ingredients can brew a deadly poison far more dangerous than cyanide-laced punch. For Western audiences, and indeed all of us today, Jonestown's legacy remains powerful. In an age of misinformation and extremist rhetoric, the story of the People's Temple is a sobering reminder of how critical it is to question those who seek unchecked authority over others. It urges us never to drink the Kool-Aid, to never surrender our ability to think for ourselves, no matter how enticing the promise or how charismatic the messenger. The people who died at Jonestown were not idiots or lunatics. They were teachers, nurses, students, war veterans, mothers and fathers, people who wanted to make the world better. You got caught in the web of a madman's delusion. As you reflect on that final night, imagining the jungle quiet now, with the pavilion full of nothing but silence and death, it's hard not to feel a profound sorrow. Sorrow for the lives lost, for the children who never got a chance to grow up, for the dreams of utopia that curdled into horror. But we must also reflect on responsibility. How can we as a society prevent this from happening again? Perhaps by educating ourselves and others on the tactics of psychological manipulation, by reaching out to those in extremist groups, by holding leaders accountable and protecting the vulnerable. Jonestown, often referred to as Paradise Lost, stands as one of history's darkest chapters. Its story is over, but its lessons remain urgently relevant. May the memory of those who perished in the Jonestown massacre serve as a stark warning of the perils of fanaticism, and a call to cherish critical thought and individual freedom. In the end, the best way to honor the victims is to never forget what happened and to ensure that we never walk unknowingly down a similar path. Thank you for watching and immersing yourself in this difficult story. If it moved you or provoked new thoughts, please like this video and subscribe for more deep explorations of history's untold shadows. And let us know in the comments, what lessons do you take from the tragedy of Jonestown?